Good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Resnick. I'm with the Cloud Collaboration Capability Team with the Office of Business Informatics in CDER here at the FDA. And today I'll be giving the Electronic Submissions Update presentation. I'll be going over 5 main areas: electronic submission guidance, talk about what's new there, the purpose of eCTD and study data requirements, CDER processing, a look under the hood, some frequently asked questions to our electronic submissions team. And I'll also talk a bit about CDER's NextGen portal and some new features that have recently been released. There is the eCTD guidance. This is a binding guidance, also called a 745A guidance, meaning that it does need to be followed. It recently received an update this past February, and it's now on revision 7. The two main things that are in the update is that Type 3 drug master files have been added to the exemption section, and the other area is that there's a section on waivers, specifically on how you can request an eCTD waiver. There's another binding guidance out there called Study Data Guidance, providing regulatory submissions in electronic format, standardized study data. And the key area in this guidance is it says sponsors must conform to standards in the FDA Data Standards Catalog, and that applies for NDA, BLA, ANDA studies that started after December 17, 2016, as well as commercial IND studies if they started after December 17, 2017. Now, this requirement has been out there for some time now, but what FDA is getting ready to do is to leverage eCTD validations to be able to automatically confirm if the sponsors are conforming to the FDA Data Standards Catalog. And it's doing that by using a subset of eCTD validations, and these are validations numbers 1734, 1735, 1736, and 1789. These validations are described in great detail. There's quite a bit of transparency around this check that will be happening in a document called the Technical Rejection Criteria for Study Data. We have a hyperlink to that below. So if you are, and I know most of you do, submit study data with your ANDAs, it is vital that you become very familiar with the documents below, that Technical Rejection Criteria for Study Data. My colleague Heather Crandall will be talking about that, the Study Data Technical Conformance Guide, as well as the website that CDER and CBER have on fda.gov for submissions of study data. Now, a little bit about the purpose of eCTD and study data requirements. Reviewing the study data in a timely manner is really important for the FDA review process. Now, when sponsors submit data to the FDA and it's in a reliable and accessible format, well, then this has benefits, right? It improves the efficiency and consistency of the review divisions. And CDISC standards are a main piece of this study data standardization, and it really enables FDA to streamline the review process. And they can do that by reducing the time for the reviewers to locate and identify study data. It reduces the burden on sponsors and reviewers from these information requests, which add time. It reduces the review time by enabling the use of COTS, or otherwise called commercial off-the-shelf software. So if a FDA reviewer can use these really nice analytical software tools, then they can be much more efficient in reviewing these submissions of study data. And so overall, all of this supports data-driven decisions by applying data mining and data analytical techniques. Now again, there's two documents, Study Data Technical Conformance Guide. Sometimes people refer to it as the Study Data TCG. and there's the technical rejection criteria for study data. So the study data technical conformance guide, that provides technical recommendations for submitting study data according to CDISC standards. The technical rejection criteria for study data, that document, now this provides the actual conditions under which FDA will not accept a submission with study data. So this is really, really important that you review this document and understand it. And if you don't understand it, you can contact us. And at the end of this presentation, I have an email address. It's edata@fda.hhs.gov on the slide. But you can reach out and ask questions about it. We want your questions. We want to be as transparent as possible about the validations that will be done. The table below shows the 4 main validations that are discussed when it comes to a submission containing study data. My colleague Heather Crandall, her presentation will be going over these, and hopefully that will become more clear if it's not already to you. Looking at electronic submissions overall coming into CDER, we see that for fiscal year 2019, CDER received approximately 205,000 electronic submissions via the gateway, that electronic submission gateway. And nearly 202,000 of those were in eCTD format. So the chart here on the bottom left is showing you eCTD submissions by application type. Each color denotes a different application type. So when we look at something like ANDAS, which is that darker blue line, we can see there's been tremendous progress in submitting the electronic information in a standardized format. So you look at today, we're at 100% or right about 100%. And you look at where we were back in for ANDA, maybe back in around 2009 or so, it was about 30%, only 30% of those ANDAs were coming in eCTD in 2009. And here to close out fiscal year 2019, we're at about 100%, just remarkable. Then looking over on the right, we have another graph here which is comparing the overall submissions, electronic submissions versus what is in eCTD. So the blue bars are showing you year over year the electronic submission count into CDER. You know, that constant amount is increasing year over year. What's really interesting is the red line. That's showing you the percentage overall that those electronic submissions are in eCTD format. And again, you know, you go back to maybe, you know, around 2009, and you see that, yeah, maybe around, I don't know, 30% of the electronic submissions were in that standardized format we call eCTD. Now, we're at almost 100%, which is really good news. Now, once the submission is transmitted to the FDA and the CDER document rooms gets it, we take a little look under the hood here, right? We know that we're getting more and more submissions coming in, and so it's important in CDER for us to be constantly improving on how we can automate the processing of these submissions. And so we are leveraging this structured metadata in the eCTD submissions to do just that. So we have computer software that is currently in place, and it's automatically determining the submission category, and it's basing that on the structured data in the eCTD sequence, and then it's able to automatically route this information to the appropriate review division. So the benefit here is that reviewers see the submission sooner, and that means you know, they'll get back to you sooner, they can start doing their work sooner, and then from a standpoint of people, you know, less people power is needed here, right? Less manual data entry is needed, and so those folks can focus on other things. Of course, we do have some challenges with trying to automate more of the submission processing here in our document rooms. And the two main ones, right? So the first one is that to efficiently and effectively process the increased number of submissions, right, and leverage that structured data in the eCTD, we want to make sure that we're not getting conflicting things coming in from that data. So the example here is a submission type is chosen in the eCTD metadata, and the submission type is also listed on the FDA form. For an ANDA, right, that would be the FDA Form 356H. And so when the submission type listed on the 356H is not aligned with what's chosen in your eCTD software tool, that causes a problem with the automated software. It kicks it out for someone to manually look at its time. The other challenge we have is the reviewers at FDA, they're set up with these great tools to be able to, analyze the study data that comes in. And they have these tools because guidance has been put out that says, hey, industry, if you're submitting study data to your ANDA, you have to submit it in this format. So we have these tools that are compatible with that format. However, we're still seeing a lot of studies come in that are not using the format that FDA has specified. And when that happens, these tools, they're kind of crippled with what they can do. They either can't be used on the study data or they can sort of be used, but it makes the whole process less efficient. When it comes to picking that right eCTD submission type or subtype, we do have specification documents out on FDA.gov that talk about that, although I do realize that most of you are probably using an eCTD publishing tool that has those rules built into it. But we did want to have this slide just for your information if you needed to look back at that. So I want to give you one example of data discrepancies. So can you guess the correct regulatory activity? So here's a submission that came in. The top part is the U.S. regional. So that's the eCTD metadata, and the bottom is FDA 356H form. So the eCTD submission type that was chosen was amendment, but on the 356H, initial submission was checked. The automated system doesn't know what to classify this as, so it gets kicked out to a person, and they then figure out from reading the cover letter that the submission was an amendment containing patent information. And so really what should have happened here is on the 356H form, the submission subtype here, it should have been amendment rather than initial submission. So overall, the impact here is when the data is submitted correctly in the backbone file on the 356H form, then we can route that submission quickly and efficiently to the correct reviewer. If it's not, it impacts what we've put in place to automate this. It takes more time, requires looking at the cover letter to resolve it, may require reaching out to you. Another area where we ask for your help is when you submit the eSite information. This has been a challenge for us over many years. We started outreach, I guess, probably maybe about 2 years ago, and it's been working. We have seen improvement, and so we continue to include a couple of these slides in here in our presentations. So the bioequivalent sites, current challenges is, key components of the BE site information is missing. The BE sites appear in various formats, and they're not consistently placed in the correct location of the eCTD. So what that means is that there are potential delays in issue of action letters, and that happens if there's a BE site that basically doesn't get discovered until very late in the review process. So how can you help us to improve the quality data? You can submit a complete list of all the BE sites on Table 10, study information, and then place the BE summary tables in Section 271 of the eCTD. And we have some examples of what we're looking for, right? To provide a separate table for each bioequivalent study. Here's examples of in vitro BE analytical sites and in vivo BE clinical and analytical sites. So now I'm going to shift gears here to frequently asked questions to our electronic submission team. This is just a few of the general questions we get. These are ones that we've discussed before in conferences. And we realize some of you have seen this before and it's old news, but there's also a churn. You know, there's new people that come into these conferences, and we want to make sure that they are able to see this information as well. So where do I place my content? This is a question we get quite consistently from a variety of applicants and sponsors and DMF holders. So what we do on the electronic submissions team is we go to the comprehensive table of contents, headings, and hierarchy document. And this slide deck has a hyperlink right to it, but it's on our fda.gov/ECTD website. We also look at the ICH M4 Organization of Common Technical Document there, and that gives some additional information as well. Again, that is also available publicly. And if we find that the person asking the question is still not clear on where to put something after they've gone to these different resources, then we recommend they reach out to their regulatory project manager and just say, hey, you know, I've looked at these resources online. It's still not clear where I should put this document within the ECTD. Do you have a suggestion of, you know, where do you normally look for it? This graphic here up on the right-hand side, this is a snapshot of the comprehensive table of contents, heading, and hierarchy. Just to give you an idea, for those of you that are not familiar with the document, the level of granularity it has. It is quite nice on really helping with where to place things. Some other questions: how do I get started with ECTD? Or how do I request an application number? How do I get a gateway account? So these types of questions are all covered on our ECTD website. And here's just a snapshot of the landing page of that website. And I've just drawn a red box there on the bottom because that's where the link is to get that specific information. And finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about CEDAR's NextGen portal. So the CEDAR NextGen collaboration portal is a cloud-based system that has enabled a transformation in a way that allows CEDAR and industry to work together. I will say the main function here, right, of what this helps is there are some types of materials which are required to be submitted in ECTD, and for those you put it in ECTD and you submit it through ESG or WebTrader. But we also recognize that there are other types of materials that you may submit that are not required to be in ECTD. And instead of having industry submit that information in paper or maybe stick it on a DVD and mail it in, we have this portal that gives you a nice, easy electronic option to communicate that information. So what are the things that have already been done and what's new? Drug shortage notifications is in there, pre-ANDA meetings, GDUFA program user fees, controlled correspondence, drug development tools, pre-assignment numbers. This is one where it used to be that you would send an email requesting an application number, or maybe you have a new ANDA that you're planning to submit and you need to get a number for it. It used to be you send an email. Now there's this nice design here on the website that you can put in your request, and it's a smoother process. And then finally, just recently, we put out the alternate submission feature on the portal as well. And this is partly due, getting this out quickly, due to COVID-19, that we wanted to make sure that we have additional options out there for sponsors that maybe they don't normally submit electronically, maybe they normally submit in paper. We wanted to provide this pathway so that instead of submitting in paper like you usually do, and again, this is for things that are not required in ECTD, that we have this electronic, simple way for you to do it. So what are alternate submissions? Well, these are submissions that do not fall under the FDA ECTD guidance, or maybe they're exempt from the guidance, or they have received a waiver from the guidance. So these are things like non-commercial INDs, right? Specifically research INDs. So with this new alternate submission category, that's been the most most common type of submission we've seen. It was just turned on a couple of weeks ago. EUAs, emergency use authorization. DMF type 3. If you're a DMF holder and you have a type 3 and that's not required to be an ECTD, you have a choice. I mean, you could get an ESG account and send it that way. There is a type 3 option now on ESG. Or you can use this alternate submission option with CEDAR NextGen. Marketing and advertising. There's now an option there where you can send your marketing and advertising submission through there. Pre-submissions, and then as I mentioned before, applications which may have received a waiver from the ECTD guidance. And there's another type in here called medical gas. That's the most common one, but that comes through too, sometimes in paper, so those can come through this portal as well. So, but the main goal here is we just want to provide a way for industry to send submissions that are not required in ECTD. You know, rather than sending those in paper or on physical media, we want to give this option where you can send it through this portal. So you might ask, how do I gain access to the portal, to this feature within the portal? Well, if you're an existing CEDAR NextGen user, next time you log in, you'll just see that this alternate submission tab is now available to you, and you can click on it and submit. If you are new to the portal, you just navigate to edm.fda.gov. The address is here on this slide, and there's a nice easy registration step. You can do it all in a short amount of time. In terms of getting support for your electronic submission, if you have a question specific to ECTD or maybe just an overall general electronic submission question, our electronic submission team is here and ready to help you. You can contact us at the eSub email up here. If you have a question in any way related to study data, so it could be a question on the technical rejection criteria for study data, that study data technical conformance guide, the study data guidance, maybe something specific about your study data in your submission, you can ask the eData team. They're set up to help you here. And then finally, if you have questions about this CEDAR NextGen portal that I just talked about, you can definitely contact the support team at the email address up here, and they're standing by and happy to help you. In summary, I want you to walk away with three main points here from today's presentation. Number one, the FDA electronic submission guidance, there was an update made to that in February of 2020, so please be sure to read up on that guidance. You can get to it on fda.gov. There's a link directly to it on fda.gov/ECTD. Also, if you are submitting study data to your ANDA, really, what you need to know to avoid a technical rejection. So what I mean by that is please go and read up on that technical rejection criteria for study data. That is a very important document for you to read about, and don't wait until a couple of weeks before you're about to submit the study. You want to read up on that as early as possible in your process of assembling your submission. The second point is helping CEDAR process submissions efficiently. So wherever you can, just make sure that when you're using your ECTD publishing tool, that the ECTD submission type that you choose doesn't conflict with what you put down on that 356H form, and that you place your BE site information in the proper location in the ECTD. And then the CEDAR NextGen portal. We've enabled this new alternate submission option in there, and this is a great alternative to submitting in paper, especially in the current environment that we're in, where most people are, they're telecommuting, and so they probably don't have access to the materials to put together a paper submission to send it in. And it helps us here at CEDAR because we have a reduced staff right now that's in the building to even process a paper submission that comes in. So really encourage you to just make use of that portal, check it out. So overall, thank you for your time this afternoon. I hope you found this presentation helpful, and I'll be around later for you to ask questions. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Heather Crandall. I am from CEDAR in the Office of Business Informatics, and I am going to talk about the study data technical rejection criteria today. So some of the learning objectives from this presentation. I'll review the importance of eCTD and CDISC standards to streamlining FDA's review processes. I'll share the latest metrics of sponsor and applicants' conformance rates to the technical rejection criteria for study data, or TRC for short, specifically for ANDA submissions. And it's important to remember as I go through this presentation that the TRC are not yet implemented. So we are running conformance analysis based on the TRC validation on submissions we are currently receiving. I'm also going to discuss the common error reasons that our conformance analysis shows and the underlying root causes, and then how the self-check worksheet can assist sponsors with avoiding these common errors for the technical rejection criteria for study data. So a brief agenda overview. So what is the purpose of eCTD and study data requirements? There are two guidances, the eCTD guidance and study data guidance, that specify these standardized requirements. And when sponsors and applicants submit data, so in this case, data could be either study data or the application as a whole, to the FDA in a reliable and accessible format, it improves efficiency and consistency of review decisions. And since the study data technical rejection criteria is coming mostly from the study data guidance, I'm going to focus on that one. So the study data guidance says that for ANDA or ANDA submissions, for those submissions that have studies that have a study start date after December 17, 2016, those studies must conform to standards in the FDA Data Standards Catalog. And while I had previously stated that the TRC are not yet effective, sponsors are still obligated to conform with the study data guidance, which is currently in effect, even though the validations to check compliance have not yet been implemented. So for our ANDA TRC conformance analysis, here is a brief trend line looking at calendar year 2018 and 2019. And you can see that there hasn't been significant improvement in the conformance analysis failure rate over this time period. You may also notice that 1734 and later in the common error section of the presentation, I will get into exactly what 1734 and 1736 errors are looking for. But for the conformance analysis trend line, you may notice that 1734 has a higher percentage than 1736. And part of this is that for our conformance analysis, if a study hits the 1734 error, the conformance analysis does not also check 1736. So that's just something to keep in mind when I go through the next couple slides with some data in them. So getting into numbers on this conformance analysis, we looked at all ANDA submissions that have study data in them, and that was 862 submissions for calendar year 2019. And from there, our conformance analysis was narrowed down to only submissions with study data in TRC applicable sections. So for those of you who are familiar with the TRC documentation, you may recall that the technical rejection criteria for study data does not apply to every subsection of Module 4 and Module 5. It only applies to specific subsections, and these are detailed in the TRC documentation as well as the validation errors themselves. So we narrowed that down to just those TRC applicable subsections. And when we do that and run our conformance analysis, we find that 256 submissions had either 1734 or 1736 errors. So there could be multiple studies within these submissions that have different errors for 1734 or 1736, but overall there were 256 submissions with one of these two errors. And that comes out to be about a 32% error rate of the submissions that had study data in TRC applicable sections. So I'm going to get in the next section for common errors, what those errors are that we're seeing for these, and then how the self-check worksheet, which is a tool available to applicants, can help in avoiding some of these common errors. So before I get into that, we also dug into a particular subsection for ANDAs, and that is the ANDA original application being submitted for first applicant status. And we dug into this particular subsection of ANDAs because when the TRC rules are enforced, submissions with study data that fail validation will be rejected and could lose first applicant status. So for when we say will be rejected, that would mean that the review division would not see your application. It would be rejected before it gets to the review division. So our analysis on this subset of ANDAs showed that in calendar year 2019, there were a total of 113 original ANDA submissions that had study data in the TRC applicable sections that were submitting for first applicant status. And of those 113 submissions, we found errors that would have a rejection rate of almost 19% of the original ANDA applications that had study data that the TRC would be checking. So this is something to keep in mind as you are putting together your submissions moving forward, bearing these technical rejection criteria for study data in mind. So getting into the top error reasons or 1734 that our conformance analysis found. So 1734 is looking for a trial summary dataset, or TS.XPT, with information on the study start date that must be present for the required sections. And for this slide, 4 required sections means those TRC applicable subsections of either Module 4 or Module 5. So the number one most common error that our conformance analysis found for 1734 was a missing ts.xpt file where the validation would expect to find one. That was 69% of the 1734 errors. Our second most common reason was a study ID mismatch between the TF and STF files. And then our third and fourth most common reasons were either there was no study start date in the TS file or the study start date was in an invalid format. The expected format is year, month, and date. So the study start date was in a format other than what the validation would expect to see. So when we talk about a missing ts.xpt file as a common error reason, there are two types of ts.xpt files that are referred to with the TRC. The first one is known as a full ts.xpt file, and that is when you are submitting your standardized tabulation or analysis data, you submit a ts.xpt file that is in CDISC format, so a standard ts.xpt file. The other type of TS is known as a simplified ts.xpt file, and that is a pared down ts.xpt file, so it contains only the 4 fields that you see on this slide, and that is used in cases where a study is being submitted to a TRC applicable section and information must be submitted with the study where the study does not require to be in a standardized format. So there's more information about when this would occur and what the expectation is around a simplified TS in the TRC documentation, as well as the Study Data Technical Conformance Guide. But in general, the simplified TS contains 4 fields: the study ID, the TS PARN CD code for saying if it's a clinical or non-clinical study, and then the study start date filled out in the TS val field, or NA, standing for not applicable, filled out in the TS val NF field for circumstances where there is not a study start date available, or there are several other scenarios where a TS val NF would be valid to be used, and those are again highlighted in the TRC documentation as well as the Study Data Technical Conformance Guide. So this gets into the second most common error reason, which is a study ID mismatch. So the validation is looking for a match between the study ID as listed in the stf.xml file, which is part of the ECTD standard, as well as the study ID listed in ts.xpt. With the update to the TRC documentation, in the fall of 2019, an alternate parameter was added to the validation to create this match between these two pieces of information. So in this example, which is a mocked up full ts.xpt file, we're saying that the study ID in the stf.xml file is S107, but the study ID populated in the ts.xpt file is not S107. However, the alternate parameter of sponsor reference ID or SPREF ID was utilized, and S107 can be found there, and this would satisfy that match for the validation. And then from there we can find the study start date in year, month, day format. So where the self-check worksheet comes into play and is very useful for 1734 is the self-check worksheet is a fillable form that was created by the FDA based on feedback from applicants to walk applicants through the expectation around the technical rejection criteria for study data and to allow applicants to check their studies against that expectation prior to submission. There is no expectation that the self-check worksheet would accompany studies upon submission. This is simply for applicants' reference. So the self-check worksheet has multiple sections, and in the first section, an applicant would fill out general application and study information of are they submitting clinical or non-clinical data, is this tabulation or analysis data, and where that comes into play will be in some of the later errors. But if the sponsor fills out that they are submitting an ANDA application with clinical data, then question 3F, highlighted here, would be available to be answered, and that is asking, are XPT datasets other than the ts.xpt file included in this particular study? The self-check worksheet is filled out for one study at a time, so if you as the applicant are submitting a application with multiple studies in it, then the self-check worksheet could be used multiple times to check each study individually. So for question 3F, if you are submitting XPT datasets and you check yes, this indicates that the technical rejection criteria would run on some of these clinical studies, and further questions would be populated based on this information, including is a full TS or simplified TS required. And there is more detail about the requirement and expectation for submitting either a full TS or simplified TS in the self-check worksheet, as well as the TRC documentation. So you can look through those to determine the expectation around which TS file should be submitted, either full or simplified. And then depending on which one you indicate in your self-check worksheet, it will populate questions based on either full or simplified being submitted. So if you check off that a simplified TS is being submitted with your study, these are the questions it will populate, asking what the study ID in the TS file is, and then because there is logic built into the self-check worksheet, it will match what is entered for the study ID in the TS file against what had been previously filled out in another section for the study ID in the stf.xml, and will automatically say yes or no, do these match. It also asks if there is a value in the TS-eval-NF field, and what is the study start date in the TS file, and if that study start date is in the valid format of year, month, and day. So these are two examples of a simplified TS file with the TS-val field filled out, and then one with the TS-val-NF field filled out. This slide provides more information on the alternate matching parameter with SPREF-ID to the stf.xml study ID, and that update that occurred in fall of 2019. So if the applicant indicates that they are submitting a full TS file with their study, then these questions will populate in the self-check worksheet instead. And it will ask, again, what is the study ID in the TS file? But there is another question to accompany this of if that study ID does not match, what is the value of SPREF-ID in the TS file? And similar logic is built into both question 4F and 4H to check the entry on these fields against what was entered as the study ID when in the stf.xml section of the self-check worksheet, which would occur before you get to this section for the TS file. And so it will check both of these against there, and the logic built into the self-check worksheet will automatically indicate if one of these and which one does match with the STF study ID, and that would populate in question 4G or 4I. It will also ask them what is the study start date in the TS file, and is that start date in the valid format of year, month, and day. The self-check worksheet does not automatically check the study start date to be in valid format. Question 4K is just a reminder of to the applicant of putting the study start date in the valid format. Moving on to the common error reasons for error code 1736. And I'll actually get to 1735 after this. I'm following the I am following the format of the self-check worksheet where this is the order that the rules are asked about. So 1736 is looking for particular standardized files to be submitted into standardized data sets, depending on which type of data set is being submitted. So for SDTM data, which would be tabulation, the validation is looking for a dm.xpt dataset and a define.xml file in those required sections. And for ADAM data, or analysis data, the validation is looking for an ADSL.xpt dataset and corresponding define.xml files submitted into the required sections. So our conformance analysis run on calendar year 2019 ANDA submissions found that the most common error for 1736 was a missing define.xml file where the validation would expect to find one. That was 62% of the time when a 1736 error was thrown. Our second most common error was a missing define.xml, dm.xpt, and or adsl.xpt And that is the case where an SDTM and ADAM data was submitted to one study, so therefore the validation is looking for all of those files. So the self-check worksheet covers 1736 by asking, based on if the applicant indicates that they are submitting tabulation or analysis data, and if they indicate that standardized data sets are expected for the study, the self-check worksheet will populate questions based on having tabulation and or analysis data present in your study. And it will ask the sponsor if a dm.xpt file is included and if a define.xml file is included for that tabulation SDTM dataset. And similarly for analysis ADAM datasets, if the adsl.xpt file is included and if the define.xml file is included. This serves as a reminder to the applicants that these files should be included in the study. For 1735, the common error reason for that is incorrect file tags for define.xml files. And 1735 error is looking for correct STF file tags to be used for all standardized data sets and the corresponding define.xml files in required sections. And the TRC documentation, as well as the 1735 error code description, specify which STF file tags 1735 is expecting to find. So for this most common error, that would indicate that the define.xml, either for SDTM or ADAM datasets, is not being tagged as 1735 would expect it to be. And this is how those file tags look in the stf.xml itself, a quick example of it, where the self-check worksheet can help sponsors avoid this error is in the same section where the self-check worksheet populates questions for 1736. It also asks about the STF file tags, and it asks if the SDTM datasets, particularly the dm.xpt, is tagged as data tabulation dataset SDTM, and if the corresponding define.xml file is tagged as data tabulation data definition. These are the file tags that the 1735 error code description calls out should be used for these files, and that 1735 is expecting to see. Also for ADAM datasets, the self-check worksheet is asking if those datasets, particularly the adsl.xpt, is tagged with analysis dataset ADAM, and if that corresponding define.xml file is tagged as analysis data definition. So again, these serve as reminders to applicants what the validation is expecting for these particular studies, so they can check their submissions against this expectation prior to submission. So these are links to the pages where you can find the technical rejection criteria for study data documentation, as well as the self-check worksheet and the instructions for the self-check worksheet. So in summary, overall, conformance for errors 1734 and 1736 have increased. And it's important to remember as going through this that, yes, the technical rejection criteria have not yet been implemented. However, in closing, the study data guidance is in effect and requires the submission of standardized study data. So there are available tools like the self-check worksheet to ensure conformance with the study data technical rejection criteria. Thank you.
And thank you, Heather. That was a very good presentation. Thank you, Jonathan, as well. We're doing a little bit of gymnastics here, reconnecting the bridge and moving to a different layout. But now that we've got that done, I am going to pass it over to Lisa, who, as always, has been monitoring the questions that are coming in. And I believe Jonathan and Heather have both called into the bridge and should be ready to go. So, Lisa, can you go ahead and read us our first question, please? And Lisa, it's the microphone icon is coming on, but we're not getting your audio for some reason. You might want to check to see next to the microphone icon if when you push that down, if you've got the right stream collected.
Okay, can you hear me now? Hello?
That sounds great. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Jonathan? Okay, you can hear me. Okay.
We can hear you.
The first question is for Jonathan. Is the NextGen portal for ANDAs only, or can it be used for NDAs? For example, requesting a pre-assigned number for a 505(b)(2) NDA.
Great question. So if you are requesting an application number, you can certainly use the portal to request it for an NDA or a BLA, pretty much any application type. You can use that application pre-assignment request function on the portal. Remember though, if you're submitting your NDA application, that needs to be an ECTD and go through the gateway. But in terms of requesting an application number, sure, you can use that CDER NextGen portal to do it.
Okay, great. Our next question is also for Jonathan. When will the FDA implement the next level of ECTD, H7?
So that question, I think, is talking about when will FDA implement ECTD 4.0, which is based on HL7, Health Level 7. So we don't have a date for that yet. The best I could say is no earlier than 2022. And if you go to our ECTD website on FDA.gov, which again is www.fda.gov/ECTD, you will be able to find a link to the ECTD 4.0 informational page. And we will definitely update that page with a date for when 4.0 will be available once we know that ourselves.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Jonathan. The next question is there any electronic method to share documents in response to a Facility 483 letter? Currently, it's very challenging to send huge files over email. It's easier to include this option in the NextGen portal. Please let us know.
That's a really good question. I myself am not familiar with the Facility Inspection 483 letter. I have not seen that on the NextGen portal, But I do know that, anytime something's coming in paper or through email, it certainly may be a candidate for being something that could work with the NextGen portal. So my suggestion to the person asking this question is to email the NextGen portal. And you can do that by sending an email to EDM, that's like Edward David Mary, at FDA, EDM support at fda.hhs.gov, and let them know about that suggestion. And that goes right to the portal team, and they can bring it back and discuss it, and maybe you'll see something happen with it.
Great. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Our next question is for Heather. So the question is, would a TS.xpt file be required if submitting a study summary? For example, studies being submitted per the guidance but not supporting the bioequivalence.
So that's a really good question. On the technical rejection criteria for study data documentation, there is a table that gives information about when a simplified TS or a full TS is expected to be submitted with certain studies. So in there, you may see that if you have certain file tags included in your study, then there is an expectation for a TS. For others, it would just be an XPT file other than a TS being submitted. And that really depends on what section you're submitting into, what your study start date is, and what your application type is. So I would recommend looking there for more detail on that specific question.
Great, thank you, Heather. And you have another question on deck. So that question starts with, what is the data sets requirement if they are submitting a 505(b)(2) NDA in 2020 with the support of studies conducted prior to December 17th in 2016? Do they need to submit the study data in the CDISC format?
So if this is an NDA, and I don't remember the types of NDAs covered under the study data guidance, but if this is one of those that is covered under the study data guidance, then for NDA, the study start date requirement is after December 17th, 2016. So it is not required to submit studies in CDISC format. However, there are still TRC expectations around those studies, so I would still recommend looking at the TRC documentation to see that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Heather. Our next question is for Jonathan. Who is the vendor of the eCTD validation software used by the FDA to screen ANDAs?
Currently, the FDA is using Global Submit. We're using their software to validate the eCTD submissions. We are in the process of transitioning to Lorenz DocuBridge for this work. So likely around summertime, the FDA vendor will become Lorenz, who's doing the validations. But as of right now, it's Global Submit.
Okay, and this is Jeff. Thank you again, Jonathan and Heather. That was outstanding. We appreciate you taking the time for the presentation and the Q&A. But once again, I have to be the time ogre, and we are coming up to our afternoon break. It is 2:15 here on the East Coast time. We're going to take about a 15-minute break, and when we come back, we'll have Ted Sherwood talking to us about the ANDA program performance review. So we'll go ahead and move into the break layout so you guys can visit a little bit with each other in the chat pod, and then we will start back up at 2:30. See you then.